name is Andy Cahan. I'm Director of Author Events, and I'm very pleased to see all of you here this evening. As the first Executive Director of the Office of Open Records for the state of Pennsylvania, Terry Mutchler's brief is to provide access to public information in order to guarantee government transparency. But for many years, as she writes in her new book, Under This Beautiful Dome, a senator, a journalist, and the politics of gay love in America, Terry Mutchler and her spouse, Penny Severns, kept their loving relationship opaque out of the fear that it would destroy their professional lives. A powerful and moving chronicle, the book is perhaps best described in the words of Carol Marin, a writer for the Chicago Sun-Times, who called Under This Beautiful Dome brutal in its honesty, shining in its love, and raw in its pain. This memoir is yet another in a series of signal achievements for Ms. Mutchler. She was the first woman appointed AP Statehouse Correspondent in Illinois, and she has won several Keystone Awards, Pennsylvania's top honor for reporting. Later, Mutchler clerked for the Supreme Court of Illinois and for the Executive Office of the President during the Clinton administration. She was also a Chicago trial lawyer at a national law firm before returning to public service as a speechwriter and senior advisor for the Illinois Attorney General. In 2012, when Terry initially approached me about presenting her book, only 9 states permitted marriage equality. That number now stands at 32, and the numbers will only continue to grow. Weaving the political and the personal under this beautiful dome is an important testament in that continuing struggle. Please welcome Terry Mutchler.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I have to confess, friends, that I had 2 very intense fears this evening. One was that the auditorium would be empty, and my other fear was that the auditorium would be full. And so, even as I was standing in the back and I looked out and I saw a very wonderful crowd, I thought, you know what? These people are here to see Anne Rice later in the week, and they just got the date wrong. So look, if you're here to see Anne Rice, please be too polite to leave. You know, I'm not a stranger to public speaking. I've given over 1,500 speeches in my work at the Office of Open Records and as its executive director. And in those speeches, I've primarily spoken about the right to know law, or what it was like to work for Governor Rendell, who sent his regrets at not being able to introduce me this evening because of the election. I've also spoken, and he would want me to tell you to get out and vote. You know, I've been asked to speak about what it's like to work for Governor Corbett, and at least for the next few days. But it's the first time that I've ever come to the podium to tell a very personal story. And so I didn't know how to do that. I wondered if I actually would have the courage to walk out and talk to you about one of the deepest, most intimate times in my life. And I was thinking, well, even if I can walk out, how am I going to do that? And so I started to talk to a whole host of people. I talked first to my partner, Maria, who's a published poet. I talked to reporters. I had the great fortune to spend some time with Madeline Fox, who, as many of you may know, is the matriarch of Fox's books. And she's seen 1,000 of these things. And I said to her, Madeline, what makes a good presentation at the Free Library? And she said to me, well, you know, Terry, they already have the book, or you hope they're going to get it. You got to give them a little more. You got to give them something. Tell them what it cost you to spend 10 years of your life writing this book. And when I was at her house and, you know, amid 1,000 books, I noticed a quotation on the wall. And it said, it was from a Philadelphia journalist named Christopher Morley. And he had written 100 books. And he said, when you sell a man a book, you're not just selling him 12 ounces of ink and paper and glue. You're selling him a whole life. And you're selling him humor. And you're selling him a friendship. And so tonight, as I read just 2 very small sections of Under This Beautiful Dome, I hope that you'll walk away feeling like I gave you a little bit more than ink and paper and glue. And as I was standing in the back thinking about Madeline's question, what did it cost me to write this, I thought, the real story here is what the secret cost me in this book. It was a secret that was so toxic it cost me my health. It was so poisonous it cost me my home. It cost me my books. It cost me my voice. It cost me my Chagalls. It actually nearly cost me my life. But the paradox and the odd thing about this secret is that it was wrapped in a great love, and so it didn't seem toxic to me. And when I agreed to enter that secret, I was only 27 years old. And what I failed to understand was the full import of a scripture, actually, that says open rebuke is better than secret love. And so with that, I'm going to read to you just a little bit about the preface. On a cold, sunny February morning in 1998, with the unusual sight of 3 rainbows arcing the Midwestern sky, the family and friends of Penny Severns gathered in the opulent chamber of the Illinois Senate to memorialize Penny, their fallen colleague, to pay tribute to the rich tapestry of her life's work. Inside Lincoln's State House, Senate President James Pate Phillip banged the oversized wooden gavel 3 times, calling to order the upper chamber of the 90th General Assembly. Senator Severns' family, followed by close friends, were escorted to the chamber as senators stood in respect. That chamber, which is laden with 1,000 ethical reckonings, was orderly and still. The Secretary of the Senate, a personal friend of Penny's, stood at the dais, a level below the president's chair, and looked over her half glasses at the audience. Then Senator Barack Obama, who was a seatmate to Senator Severns and who she served as his mentor. Representative Jan Schakowsky, now Congresswoman, and others from the House and Senate looked on, grieved and heavy. And Penny's seat was draped in a black cloth, stark against the white calla lilies centered on her antique roll-top desk. The clerk cleared her throat and, fighting tears, read Resolution 168, outlining the accolades of this rising young star in the Democratic Party, whose life was cut short by metastatic breast cancer 1 month to the day after her 46th birthday. Every detail of her life was preceded in that reading by the Senate tradition and the political lingo of the word whereas. And those listening were then reminded of her life. Whereas, at the age of 20, while still a student, Penny Severns was elected as a delegate to the Democratic National Convention, then the youngest delegate in convention history. Whereas, she was appointed to a prominent post within the United States State Department, traveling to Thailand, Nepal, and India, evaluating countries and their poverty programs. Whereas, while she was at the State Department, she was the agency representative at the Camp David Peace Accords and was in attendance when that historic document was signed. On a trip to Israel, she spent time and met Israeli leaders Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin. This resolution detailed Penny's political accomplishments, including winning a Decatur City Council seat with the largest number of votes in history, a record that still stands. Her victory in the Senate, unseating a popular 10-year Senate leadership incumbent, I hope her spirit's with us this week, and her history-making bid as the part of the first all-female major party gubernatorial ticket in American history when she won the nomination for lieutenant governor in Illinois. Then they read her academic credentials, a degree in political science and international relations, a fellowship at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, a Toll Fellowship for which she was chosen among the nation's elite lawmakers, and an appointment to the German Marshall Fund, where she studied job creation in Denmark and Germany. Some of her colleagues cried as that resolution was read. That resolution also regaled Senator Severns' love of music, art, history, nature. And as we all sat there, we knew that those senators had their own memories of their colleague. Whereas then came the lie. The lie that contradicted the rumors that were rightly whispered and wrongly denied. The lie that had been culled from Penny's own obituary, which I had written just days before in my own hand. That obituary contained a 3-word lie that was perhaps the most painful words I've ever written. I wrote of Penny Severns, my partner and mate. She was single. Whereas Senator Penny Severns is survived by her father, Donald Severns, and his wife, her twin sister, Patty Severns Love, and her husband, Douglas, her brother, Rod Severns, and his wife, Jane, her other brother Don, her great-nieces and nephews, and predeceased in death by her mother, Helen Severns. There was no mention of the life that Penny and I had created and lived together. There was no mention of the marriage proposal she made to me 3 months into our relationship. There was no mention that we forged our marriage with the symbols of a ring and a bracelet. No mention of the conversations we had about whether to have children. There was no mention of the unbelievable and absolutely crazy extent that we went to hide this relationship. No mention of our shared finances or of our dreams to retire together. No mention of our life as we struggled with the news of her returning cancer. No mention of how tenderly we took care of each other as she was ill. And no mention of how I tended her as she was dying. There was no mention of me at all, in fact. The best years of our lives were written in invisible ink. In the aftermath of Penny's death, I struggled in every way to make my life visible, to preserve that life, to be recognized in a life that we strove to keep hidden, and yet at some of the most basic levels was open. Our families addressed holiday cards to us, birthday cards. They insist we sleep in the same bedroom in their homes, even when it only had a twin bed. Penny and I, we were friends. Penny and I were inseparable at every holiday and family function, and we bought joint presents for our family, and our relationship seemed common underground knowledge on the political circuit. Political friends whispered about our relationship, and political enemies threatened to use it for political gain. Years after Penny's death, I learned from my reporting pals that Penny and I were a bit of a parlor game to them. They would ask over brandy and cigars, were Penny and Terry lovers? 2 years after Penny died, I was still shut off in every way from her family and had no say in the aftermath of her death. I was completely consumed with grief and exhaustion and confusion. With no hope that Patty, her twin sister, would ever acknowledge me as even a friend to Penny, let alone her spouse, I drove to Patty's house to talk about the love that Penny and I had shared. I decided to speak the truth with the hope of cutting away this confusion and craziness. I wanted to declare aloud what Patty had already accepted and honored until Penny's death, that Penny and I were lovers and considered ourselves married. I really hoped we would weep together over the incalculable loss of her twin and of my spouse. I certainly hoped I would regain my possessions, or at least some of them. I hoped to grieve together with Penny's identical twin and move through that dark jungle of death, easing the pain just by being together. But those hopes were met with the stark reality that I was more foe than family, and all marks of our friendship and love had erased. In a last-ditch effort of reaching Patty's consciousness, I said, what if, God forbid, your husband died and you were locked out of your house? Or what if Doug died and your father-in-law started going through your mail or made your husband's funeral arrangements? How would you feel? I was certain this parallel would resonate. Don't say you were married, Terry, she said, shaking her head as though a child blocking a taunt. You were not married, you were friends. Penny took you under her wing, that is all. Under this beautiful dome makes visible the hidden life that I lived with my spouse, Penny Severns. And it lays bare the consequences of living a lie and of denying gays and lesbians access to marriage equality. For some people, this is going to be a story of deep betrayal. And for others, it's going to be a story of great strength or great weakness. And for others still, it's going to reinforce the doctrine of punishment for moral failings. For me, though, this story remains, and it always will, a love story. Whereas, now be it resolved. So I'm going to skip, all of the book and take you to another reading. But I want to tell you a little bit about what I'm going to skip. I'm going to skip falling in love with Penny. I'm going to skip her marriage proposal to me just 3 months into our relationship. I'm going to skip, sorry about that. I'm going to skip her cancer diagnosis. I'm going to skip all the international travel that we did. I'm going to skip her second cancer diagnosis. I'm going to skip law school and her political career. I'm going to skip her third and fourth cancer diagnoses. I'm going to skip the terrible day that I was locked out of our home. I thought I was going to read that to you, but I can't even read it to myself. And I'm going to pick up at the end of the book where I had given up trying to reach Patty's consciousness, where I had met with her several times, and I'm skipping the part where she offered me $1,000 to sign away that Penny and I were partners and that we were just friends and that I had no interest in the estate. And what I'm going to read to you now with a bit of a preface is something called Seasons of Grief. Nearly 2 decades later, I still do not have any of my things, not even the limited list that I asked for. I ran into Patty at the funeral of Senator DiMuzio in 2004, and I just ignored her. I couldn't do it. She wanted to speak casually, but I was not interested. I never spoke to Penny's father again, who died in 2013 at the age of 90. You know, I still ache for certain pieces of our life together, whether it's a jacket she wore, or a book she read, or a piece of art that we bought. I know now that what I possess is the most cherished aspect of my life with Penny, which is our love and our memories. But the things I lost, even though they're just material in one sense, they mean a great deal in death. And even the smallest item that belonged to a loved one becomes a token of that life shared together. You pick it up, you cry a little, you laugh a little, you put it back down. They become the conduits between this dimension and the memory of those that we lost. Anger and grief about the things that we shared and the things that were taken from me are corded in me like a brown rope that splinters and burns your hands. Our shared life yanked through my fingertips. Our home, our dining room table, our couch, our bath towels, our sheets, our tablecloths. Our dinner plates, our glasses, her favorite mugs, our coffee maker. Our knives, our forks, our spoons. Our bed, our fireplace tools. My favorite cookbooks, our pie dishes. Our magazines, her favorite music, our aluminum ladder. Our grease-stained lawnmower. Our rakes. Our gas cans. Our tools. Penny's clothes, her around-the-house shirts, her toothbrush, her Borghese lotions, her brooches and rings and bracelets, the socks with holes in them, our blankets, our beach towels, our fingernail clippers, our art, our books. Oh, God, the books. The blue silk dress she bought for our first anniversary dinner that never got its public debut because as we got ready to walk out the door, we stumbled into a kiss and never reached the car. Her favorite teal gardening shirt, our gardening gloves. The rope burn of loss leaves me paralyzed still, staring at my pain-red palms. I'm unable to comprehend the speed of this loss. Clenching my fists, I try to grip that invisible rope. If I am quicker, if I am better, if I am good, if I'm visible, if I were lovable, surely I would be able to put the key in my front door, and this time that key would turn. The house is still there on Sims Drive. I still have the key on the leather coach ring that Penny gave me. Surely I could walk back into my dismantled life. Every fall, my body tightens at the scent of cool air, and I try to soothe the pain of losing our good books and warm sweaters and wool socks. And every winter, I try to forget the pain of losing every Christmas ornament we ever hung on an evergreen. And every spring, I wade through the muddy memory of our yard tools and lightweight jackets from Columbia and North Face. And like clockwork, every summer, my stomach and chest cord around each other, twisted and gnarled, as I face the loss of our outdoor furniture. These are the inescapable seasons of grief. Every year, pockets of happiness pop up like Delft blue hyacinths in a mailbox catalog selling patio furniture. The silent pages boast a summer dinner party, friends laughing, women in white sundresses and hats, and broad-shouldered men in blue-striped shirts and boat shoes. Cherry tomatoes and quartered artichokes lay on the grill with charcoal marks as evenly spaced as black lines in a composition notebook. For a moment, I even forget my loss, and I'm stringing outdoor lights and lighting citronella candles. I have come to terms with Penny's death, and I feel her love with me as an advocate and guide. But what I struggle to accept or even make sense of is that I could not speak. Or whisper a protest, even when the locks were changed on my own home. Somewhere inside my own being, I believe that because Penny and I were lesbians, we were second-class citizens, and that is the most difficult grieving that I do. I believe that because we broke a moral code, I didn't have a right to claim my own life. Certainly, I wasn't entitled to the things that made our house a home, things that I'm never going to see or touch again, things that I'll just only be able to think about. I'm tormented by an inconsolable ache. If I hadn't been denied the mourning ritual afforded to any widow, to go through her spouse's things, to touch them, to smell them, to hold them as I could not hold Penny, that the skin of my heart may have healed more quickly or differently. It may have healed at all. You know, I try to buy more yard furniture. Sometimes I even get to the store to pick it out, or I find myself on that last confirmed purchase page. But like that same ritual, every year I walk away or close the screen. Because to purchase another set of outdoor furniture requires me to face the vivid memories of sitting on our deck late at night, smelling the char of New York strip and grilled vegetables. It requires me to come to terms with the fact that all the parties that Penny and I envisioned, the ones we planned aloud as a game to kill time and pain when she was hospitalized, will only ever be that, just imaginings. To let go of our deck furniture and let it rest where it now lives with Penny's father and Penny's sister requires me to accept the reality of what happened and my part in it. I willingly walked into the windowless brick prison of our secret life, decorated with sweetness and shame. And I mistakenly handed the key to someone I loved and thought at the very least would be a benevolent warden. The cycles of seasons has changed for me now. Time is no longer marked by blushing leaves that give way to swirling snows, or a sopping wet yard that dries into the green grass of endless summer days. No, the quadrants of my equinox are hope, dashed hope, paralysis, and anger. Anger is sometimes my longest season. And even amid falling deeply in love again with Maria, a woman from Greece who I've loved since the minute I laid eyes on her, I'm sometimes still caught in that past anger of being locked out of my home. Eventually, though, that white hot anger cools and I calm down. The werewolf of grief, exhausted and unsatisfied, tires of prowling and falls asleep inside me, and hope and belief bubble again within me. And my heart gains momentum, and I'm able to love deeply and dream long into this future with Maria. I know that next year, yes, next year, certainly by my 35th, my 40th, my 45th, and now my 50th, at the very latest, I'm going to possess the courage to demolish every brick, buy new Adirondack chairs, another grill, a colorful umbrella, and an array of outdoor candles, striking a match to the past and the future at once. So thank you all, and I think I don't see Andy around, but there he is in the back. So we have questions, and if anybody has questions, I'd be very happy to try to answer them. Lucky me. Yes. Leave it to a journalist. Go ahead.
Oh. I'm asking the questions to get the conversation started.
Thank you.
But what did you think was the change in the family from the point of time where you went and had holidays together and they seemed to accept you? I mean, was it just money that they wanted to shut you out of the estate?
You know, I don't know the answer to that, and if I knew the answer to that, I probably would have written it. The dynamic with Penny's family, and let me be clear there's a lot more to Penny's family than her father and her twin. And Penny's brother Rod and his wife Jane and Penny's brother Don Jr. In many ways saved my life. They were extremely kind. I'm in touch with Rod until this day. And the change happened very immediately with Penny's twin and with her father. But it was a very confusing time. There's several theories that I have as to why it happened. You know, I don't think it was as easy as money, although I think that money takes on very special meanings in death. And I think that oftentimes, as I wrote in the book, you play the grief Olympics. My loss is more important than yours, or this loss meant more to me than it does to you. And it's kind of an invisible staking out of territory of death. I think that was part of it. I think jealousy may have been part of it. I wish I could have said to them, there's plenty of grief to go around, but I don't know the answer to that. Yes, in the middle there. Oh, yeah, in the middle.
Terry, when I read your book, I was so struck by two things, well, among many, but one was some of the malevolent behavior of people who loved Penny. And I guess maybe your comment on that, like the note that was tacked to your apartment door that was so spooky to you.
Right.
Maybe talk about that. And then the other thing was the great lengths you went to, like to walk, the miles that you walked to evade.
You can tell I don't walk anymore.
Maybe talk about that. For somebody who never had to do that, it just struck me
Right.
as so awful.
Well, thank you, Corinna, for that question. The note that she refers to is the very first weekend that Penny and I spent together. There was a knock on my door. I was new in Springfield, Illinois, did not know literally one person. I figured somebody in my family must have died, and Penny became very grave and said, please don't answer that. And it was weird. It was, because of course I was going to answer my door. Later in the weekend, we discovered a note slid under my door from the Secretary of the Senate, who had been out looking for Penny. Penny had not been home for a few days, and the note simply said, it was torn off on a bank deposit statement, which weirdly I kept, but it said, Penny, call your mother, she's worried. And so we felt immediately tracked and hunted, and and it wasn't so much that the note was, anybody could do that. If you think someone's missing, I get that. But it was our reaction to it. It sent us into an immediate, hide at all costs kind of mode. And also against the backdrop of the fact that we were still trying to figure out what this was. Was it a fling? Was this going to be a long relationship? And so it started the trajectory of a very bizarre and toxic experience that, to this day is very difficult to talk about. We would park about 2 miles away from each other's homes. We would walk the 2 miles. When the cleaning lady came to our house, we would go through this manic morning maneuver of making sure, at the time I had very long hair, and making sure that there were no long hair on the sheets, that there was no evidence of my life in my own home. We would take pictures down of us, and then that just became a time suck, and we just didn't put pictures up. So we went to absolutely crazy lengths to keep this under wraps. And part of that was legitimate in the sense that, in central Illinois, it's probably not much different than many parts of central Pennsylvania. And, Peoria is not that far from Pittsburgh in its moral compass, I guess. And at the time, we had the experience of the state's attorney in Macon County, where we lived, going on a campaign to run the faggots out of the parks. And when he was called to task for it, the community came out in droves to support him. And at the time, you may remember that there was a sailor who had been gay and who had been beaten to death. And when his mother came to testify to the Illinois Senate, to a committee that Penny chaired, later that night, she told me about all the remarks that the senators were making off to the side. And on that same story, in the newsroom, what I would hear from my fellow reporting colleagues was, he should have known better than to join the Navy. And so our fear, while we took it to extraordinary paranoid extremes, was also grounded in a little bit of reality in that way. In retrospect, of course, I wish that somebody would have found us out. I was recently in Greece, and while I was in Greece, the Chicago Sun-Times was doing a front page story on the book. And I remember returning home and looking at the front page story and thinking, if this would have run in 1993, I probably would have jumped from a bridge, literally. And here it is, all these years later, I'm out in every aspect of my life, and it was such a different dynamic. So the book talks about some of that craziness. Other questions? Yes.
I haven't read the book yet. I'm really excited to. But I was just wondering now.
It's a downer. She dies at the end.
And in the preface. But I was wondering now, since it's post-DOMA and post-Illinois having their own marriage ban, whether or not you are able to or want to try and get back the Adirondack chairs and things like that, or if that does not apply.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm more interested in the Chagalls than and my art and books than that. But that's not a piece that, believe it or not, that I've tried in different ways when I was in living it. And Penny's brother and I often have discussions about that as to whether or not, given the fact, as you'll read in the book, that there was a fraud committed with the will, whether or not that is something that could be revisited. But for me, my treasures are ahead of me and with me, and so I don't look back in that way. I wouldn't say no to the Chagalls, but it's about the best I can say at this point. Yes.
Was I right in picking up that there were some religious issues involved in your
There
story?
was a ton of them.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a fundamentalist family, and in many ways, in my youth, religion, not to paraphrase a phrase, but religion saved me in a lot of ways. I was a victim of childhood sexual assault, of childhood molestation, and I grew up in a family that, while it was quite loving in many ways, it also was replete with alcoholism and poverty. And so when my family came to leave Catholicism behind and embrace an evangelical preacher who, to this day, I have great respect for, it was a way out in a lot of ways. And believe me when I tell you, I don't understand this paradox, but a lot of people have said to me, have you denounced religion, or, have you seen the folly of the faith? And that is not something I am willing or able to do, because while faith, my interpretation of faith contributed to, my own role in this, faith really, for me, saved me through that very horrific ordeal. And, I leaned on it then, I lean on it now. However, I do think that faith and religion are hijacked. I think that, as my father once said to me before he died, I wish he'd have said it a little earlier, don't try to think for God. But there was a lot of, for me, and one of the chapters in the book is, and I've had to come to terms with this, when Penny became sick, I was convinced that she got cancer because we were lesbians. And when I say that I was truly convinced of that, I really was. And I ended up, in desperation, making a deal with God that if he would heal her, I would leave her. And I left and went to Alaska. And it's a very traumatic chapter in the book for myself. And it only lasted a day. By the first day I got there, I was like, okay, that's not going to work. And so it's a heavy, there's a heavy overlay of religion in the book, and I do think that religion gone awry got me into trouble, but I don't to this day believe that it was the fault of that. It was it was a perfect storm of a lot of stuff, and without the skill set to handle it then, both as a child and as a young woman. You go back to the old things, it's like it goes back to the weakest or the most threadbare part of yourself, which for me was alcoholism, which was faith on the good end of it. And so there's a lot of that in there. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I was just wondering how the relationship while you were in it affected your own career and work.
My relationship, it's kind of odd. It ended my journalism career, and rightly so. I mean, I was an AP bureau chief sleeping with a state senator. It's not a very good mix in the ethics department. I actually quote a Philadelphia Inquirer editor who once said to my journalism class, "I don't care if you screw the elephants, just don't cover the circus." And so, so it's interesting because that ethical conundrum we talked more about than the toxicity of what we were doing and lying. We talked about it virtually every day. After my little detour to Alaska, I left journalism, and then I became Penny's press secretary, and it enabled us to create a structure where I could be with her, and we could be together without raising too many eyebrows, at least. And so I learned a great deal about the inside of a political world, which came into play later. After Penny died, I finished law school, clerked for the Supreme Court in Illinois, and then after a stint in private practice, the Attorney General asked me to come and speechwrite for her, which I basically learned, in doing it for Penny. And then my work as an open government advocate also started to grow during that time, which is what led Governor Rendell to ask me to come to Pennsylvania. So, it's that flip side. It ended my journalism career being in that relationship, but it opened up a lot of other doors that I'm still experiencing today. Other questions? Sure, right here in the front.
I'm just wondering since this book is out and you are clearly out about your relationship in that time in your life, have you had reactions from people and your colleagues from that time over what is said in the book? And
yeah, I mean, I've had the majority of reaction that I've had from the book has been good. I've had a tremendous outpouring in a way from people at that time. What's interesting to me is the number of friends who, just one the other day at lunch, said to me that they were very hurt that I didn't feel that I could trust them enough for whatever those reasons were. And some of that feedback it's been hard to hear because, but good, because obviously that, when you look at some of the folks who were fellow reporters in the book that were friends, obviously I was pretty much lying at every turn. And, and that certainly had its own effect in that way. I have not heard from, I've obviously heard from Penny's brother. He and his wife Jane helped me many times in this writing process and keeping the book kind of moving. But interestingly also, I have not yet, I haven't heard from, sort of the wellspring of political circles. I did when I was in Illinois for the marriage equality bill, have a lot of feedback then, but now as the book's starting to take off, I'm starting to get more correspondence from people that I don't know. Virtually all of it has been good. I hope that answers that. Okay. Anybody else?
It seems apparent that... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, please. Wait.
It seems apparent that in the next couple of years there will be gay marriage in all 50 states. Do you have a sense of where the movement will go or should go now to improve cultural acceptance of gay marriage and gay lifestyles?
Well, I was going to sort of kind of dismiss that with a funny remark and say that the movement is headed toward divorce, but I decided not to do that. But in seriousness, I do think that let me jump back here for a second. I had the great opportunity to give a copy of this book to President Obama, and because he was Penny's seatmate, I was able to do a personal inscription. And one of the things that I was able to write in that was about the fact that even though there is this tremendous wellspring of movement in the gay marriage acceptance, that we have a lot of work to do other than just changing this legally, which of course is the first task. But there also has to be a healing of the mindset, because it's still, at least in my experience, I still see that while it is, of course, yards and light years better than it has ever been and will continue to be moving forward, but there's still a pocket of folks that that it's not a 100% acceptance yet. And even though it's legally acceptable, it's not, there's still some tinge to it. And I think that the movement then has to, once we capture the legal component, I think it has to be to the mindset and to make sure that that equality is truly, threaded through. Does that answer your question? I think the way that you do it is that you be out and honest, and that you remember that, one of the greatest things that I've learned in this is that people can disagree about lots of things, and it doesn't automatically mean that they're haters. Or, there's a guy that I work with who's a conservative Republican who, he's much further along on the idea of gay marriage, but he is often labeled as a hater, and he's one of the nicest people that I know and I trust. And I think that on both sides, we have to look at this as a marathon, not a sprint, and we have to really take a deep breath and make sure we're bringing as many people along as we can. I think the best way to do it is to live honestly and to be in all the places that anybody else would normally be, whether it's going to be your church, your school, your playground, whatever, and just, and keep moving forward and recognizing that, I think at least, that capturing and helping young children and young adults understand this is what's gonna be the push behind the sea change across the board, I think. There was a question over here.
Terry, I just wanted to ask you to talk about something. I know you from high school, and some of my warmest memories from high school is laughing with you, and your sense of humor and your smile. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about how maybe that sense of humor has gotten you through some of these dark times.
That's it. Well, first, thank you, John. That was it was very nice. I haven't seen John since we left high school, I don't think. Maybe a few times in the middle there. I think that what happens in someone's life over the course of someone's life is all of those wonderful things that we gather about ourselves as children stay with us, and sometimes we forget them, but they're an innate part of who we are. At the same time, I think that some of the things that make us most afraid as children and that are our Achilles heel can tend to harm us. For me, I think that, believe it or not, I actually think humor harmed me than helped me in this. And I didn't realize that until I had done this fellowship at Harvard a few years ago, where it's like this woman's question to me. My initial reaction is to deflect it with some humor because I didn't know how to answer it. And so my first thing is to say, well, the movement's headed to divorce, and divert from that real moment. And so I think that in retrospect, humor has helped me a great deal, and it's never been too far from me, even though I don't really remember it in some of the darker times of this book. But I think that when people would ask me the truth of my life, for example, one of my brothers said to me, right after I met Penny and everybody could see this change in my life, he said, this is my brother Scott, who you might know. He said, "You're not one of those funny women, are you?" And it's about the best language we could get in our house, I guess. And I said, "Well, geez, Scott, I'm hilarious." And, instead of taking that moment and trying to use it, I used humor. So the humor and the faith, though, even in the darkest times, I was able to maintain some semblance of that. It's just that, as with my entire life, things went off kilter in a lot of ways, good and bad. And but humor definitely helped at some point after the fact. I think it wasn't a friend to me as I was experiencing this.
Hi, Terry, and just like John, I also know Terry from high school.
I'm starting to sweat, I'm telling you.
But in reading your book, you know, some of my favorite parts were when you visited your sister Donna, and how it just struck me at the peace she must have felt and her acceptance of you. And I just remember her from high school as well, and you know, my heart was just like, oh, yay, like Donna's there.
Well,
I just thought maybe you could talk about those people in your life and how important.
Donna is one of the most significant, she's my sister, she is one of the most significant people in my life. She is a friend in the truest sense of the word, has been with me at, I couldn't even, you know what, it would take like a whole nother 3 hours to even begin. I unfortunately did not trust myself enough to tell Donna when I first fell in love with Penny. Donna is a Christian. She works for a missionary. She works for someone I have a tremendous amount of respect and love for. And I was afraid that if I told her, I would lose one of the most significant sort of mother figure. She's about 10 years older than I am in my life, and I couldn't quite bring myself to do that. It's interesting to me that it took me 2 years after Penny's death to actually come out. And the only reason I came out then was because I couldn't tell people what was really going on in my life unless I told the big significant piece, you know, what was happening. And so, you know, Donna has been a rock. And interestingly, some of my other brothers and sisters have also, you know, stepped up at different times in that. At the time that I was experiencing this, I thought I was alone. But I really wasn't. I mean, for those of you who've had the chance to glance through the book, you'll read about Clint Bruno, my pal from law school, Rod and Jane Severns, who literally saved my life on more than one occasion, my sister in that. And there was a whole, I would say this to anybody that's in a similar situation or that is struggling with this, there is a whole band work of people ready to help you. You just have to ask. And sometimes finding the courage to ask is the hardest thing. And in my family, there was that line that you really sort of had to cross. If you didn't ask, you know, nobody really wanted to, I don't think people really wanted to know, you know, and so there was that as well. I often wish that the group of women and friends that I've come to know after Penny's death, that if any one of them would have been around, you know, or we would have let them in just enough, somebody really could have, you know, saved us from our own folly. There's a scene in the book where one day I ended up naked behind a furnace because Penny's parents, who had not yet met me, came over to the house to do something, and I was naked in our kitchen making coffee, and there was nowhere to go. Charming moment in the book. You know, I kind of wish they, you know, what, right? I kind of wish that they'd have found me. I wish that somebody would have, you know, maybe not then, but, you know, at least with a shirt. But I wish there was a reporter in the book, a fellow reporter who one night, I mean, I was starting to get this reputation of being a recluse and a loner, which nothing could have been further from the truth, but I was hiding from them. And one night, what I used to tell her, my brother was a truck driver, and he delivered to Archer Daniels Midland Company in Decatur. And I would often always say, oh, yeah, my brother's in town, I got to go. And I would, you know, leave. And one night, that Monday, she said, you know, I looked at your mileage. You didn't go to Decatur. I swear to God to you, you would have thought we were trying to decipher the scrolls. I mean, we looked at every angle of, oh my God, what are we going to do? Are we going to put an index card over our, you know, somebody should have just called us on this. But there were a lot of people, my sister being one to this day still, who are a great support, and I'm thankful for that. Yes.
I believe that a good reason that most people they shy away from the gay lifestyle stuff is because of religion. And you've mentioned before how you were Catholic, was it? Mm-hmm. And then you moved to evangelism, yes? Mm-hmm. And you touched on a minister who was really influential to you on that time. And I was hoping maybe you could touch more on that, because I believe that religion could be is one of the biggest humps for people to accept gay marriage overall, because of the how the Bible says it. I myself am a Christian. I understand, what it says about that, but I personally I support the gay marriage thing on all ends. Actually, I was just hoping you just touch
Sure.
more on that.
I think that I will confess up front, I get really nervous when I talk about religion. I don't know why, actually, other than I'm not an expert, and I think that every single person has their own individual road to walk, whatever that is. And so my experience might not be your experience, and your work might not be my work in the global sense. The minister that I refer to in the book is a man named William Branham, and he was very special to me because he never took an offering in his ministry. I think it's what attracted my parents to it in some measure. He was very humble. He would travel the world and say that if God wanted him to go around the corner or around the world, that God will make a way, and that the day that he needed to beg for money, he would stop. To this day, his ministry still doesn't take offerings. And so, as we all tend to do in one way or another, there were very loving components of that ministry. I chose to focus on kind of create things that weren't even said. I was just convinced from what I saw in my family and the way that I saw, you didn't even identify them as gay people at the time, but the way people were treated, I knew something was off. I remember I was in kindergarten, and I remember having a bus driver that was a lesbian. I remember my parents, I think I put this in the book, it may have gotten edited out. They had hours-long discussion about whether this was going to be okay, to which my father, who had a great sense of humor, said, "She's stronger than any iron worker I know. They're going to be fine." And so, but there was always this dichotomy. I think that we, as people that are Christians, I think often are so interested in telling you what not to do instead of telling you what to do. And I think that, at least for a while, for me, it's more focusing on love and acceptance and kindness. And I will tell you that it is this experience, although I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, it has given me a tremendous empathy for a whole host of other people, not just people that are in grief. But, every single person in this room has a story. Every single person in this room has an anguish and a pain and perhaps a secret. And I've become much more kind because of it. As to religion, I think, as I said before, I think we see people that hijack it. I think we see people that put themselves in the place of God to try to tell us, for their own further benefit. But I also believe, as in, for example, the answer here about my sister, I believe that there's the real deal out there too. And there are people that are truly Christians in the finest sense of the word, Muslims in the finest sense of the word, Hindus in the finest sense of the word. And I don't have the answer as to, how to tap into that other than just being aware. Let me go to somebody else over here. Oh, okay. Hello.
My question is about writing. You mentioned the women of Pine Mountain, and I'm interested to hear you talk a little bit about how you used writing with your grief as a tool.
The writing was complicated. The reason I ended up at a writing retreat was because a college friend saw the deep suffering that I was in, still drinking very heavily, still doing all the wrong things to move this grief instead of being honest, and said, "Look, you're a writer. Why don't you come to this writing retreat in Pine Mountain, California?" And when I went there, I, of course, had the thrill of meeting Maria, but I also, at that time, I told the story for the first time publicly, and I witnessed the power in that. It took 10 years after that, and I also, as you know, I had a lot of help in this process. My writing process, when it would stall, I also used a life coach a writer who was someone who was able to help me separate out, the therapy issues from the just mere procrastination or the writer's block of this. Dina, who asked the question, was somebody that I got to know on the Pennsylvania Turnpike commuting to Harrisburg every day, and who is a life coach. And we worked very closely on trying to, when I first started this, I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I could actually tell this story with all the components of it and revisit in the way that you need to. And so my writing process at the very beginning in 2004 was pretty simple. I would do pastels and painting on Friday night. I'd write on Saturday, and on Sunday I would just collapse, basically. I did that over about 6 months. And then I put the book away again until 2011 when I landed an agent. And then it's actually unbelievable to say this for any writers that are in the room that know the depth of it, but for the last 3 years, Maria gave up every weekend that we had together and many vacations so that I could get this book out into the world. And so as in the struggle that I had with the grief then, I was not smart enough to ask for help. This time around in writing the book and experiencing it again, I was. And the writing process for me was facilitated by lots of things. Maria would do writing workshops. She's a writing teacher. You are a life coach. And so I employed a lot of different skills therapy to actually be able to get quiet enough to get through that. Okay. Yeah, sure. Anybody? Go ahead.
One thing I kind of noticed throughout the conversation you've had this evening is talking about how you hoped someone had found, in some sense, found you out. And it's interesting to me that you ended up going from hiding a large portion of your life to then working for transparency. Is there any overt tie-in between the two? Is that conscious? Did that happen by accident?
I'm going to now call on my therapist to... Well, there's a couple of different things. That's a great question. When I was a reporter, much of my work was funneled through the Freedom of Information Act, and so I was no stranger to these laws long before I met Penny. It's interesting to me that one of the greatest ethical conflicts in my life came from this relationship when, with Penny, when another great ethical moment in journalism at least was I had been sentenced to 6 months in prison for refusing to reveal a source. And so, I look at these today and I think, really, is this the same person, that could have that coexist? The big difference in my work in transparency is about records. It's not about people. I firmly believe that citizens own this government, and it kind of makes me sick every time I walk into a room and I see that we, the public servants, are being served by the public instead of us serving the public. It really does. It drives me nuts. But having said that, my work now is focused on transparency. I'm sure that there's a lot of deeper components to that. It's not lost on me that when I was 10 and was a victim of sexual assault, that happened to be the year that I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. And I'm sure that there's some, component to that. I'm sure that there's some drive in me about openness, although it's less about people than it is about records. Thank you all very much for spending the time to come out.